know you always start the interviews or conversations, because let's be honest, these are conversations. I'm not interviewing you. I just want to talk about your life. But these are just amazing conversations. And I always like to check the last name because I have a tendency to mess that up. But Andrew Bustamante is here with us. And I know that you've all seen him before. Right now, he's hitting the circuit and it's on fire. I can definitely see the work you're putting in, my friend. But it's appreciated because of your viewpoints. And I think, moreover, right now, we need viewpoints. We need understanding like yours. We need conversation like yours, because it feels like so much is going on in the background and the rest of the world is tired of looking at what's being given to us and going, oh yeah, we believe all of that. We need to understand the depths of things. And I think that you're a really good individual to explain that. So thanks for taking time to be here.
No, thanks for having me, Kelsey. And I appreciate the feedback too, because it's difficult, right? It's a real challenge to be out as much as I get out, as much as you get out, as much as anybody who's on a podcast circuit or tour. I mean, it's challenging. Not only is it challenging on your time and on your family, but it's also challenging because there's always people who disagree with you. There's always people who want to slice and dice you. There's people who want to tear you down. There's people who want to talk shit about you. And, it's the silent majority are the ones that appreciate you, and the verbal minority are the ones who have nothing good to say.
Are you experiencing this right now, Andrew?
Oh yeah, I think we all experience it. You know how that goes, right?
Yes,
but that's what's nice. What's nice about getting shot at for real is that you don't really care when assholes throw commentary at you.
Let's go. You are going to be spicier than I've seen on any other show. And I don't know if it's because I'm just giving you the space for the spice, but I'm sorry, Lex. This is different. This is different, homie. This is amazing. I'm so glad that we finally did get a chance to talk. The very first time I did see you on was Lex. And so I do owe him a thanks for having you, because I think you were introduced to the world. And I could be wrong. There could have been others, but this was the first of my exposure to you and kind of learning and listening a little bit about your life. And I found it so fascinating to see that the very similar transition I see with other friends. They go military, and then it's the slight, easy transition right into CIA. And these guys, I always want the story. I want someone to tell me that someone just like tapped them on the shoulder and was like, psst, psst, coffee shop. But it's never that. Everyone's like, no, Kelsey, that's not how it works. I wasn't in long enough for them to pick me. It's fine. I'm also Canadian. So tell me, first off, why you went into the service, the military, the first place, what year you joined, and give me a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a glorious story. I came from, I was a brown kid in a rural Pennsylvania town. That's what it was. I had a guidance counselor. For anybody who was a public school kid who had a guidance counselor, I had a guidance counselor who told me my options were really to either enlist in the military or go to community college. My parents were both, my dad was a Vietnam vet. My mom was an Air Force veteran. Both of them basically told me I had two options: enlist in the military or get a job locally. So I was literally at that place in America. I'm sure you got places like this in Canada too, where there are no options.
Yes, I come from one.
Yeah. And, people who grew up in a location like that, they know exactly what we're talking about. There are no good options. I mean, hell, it's what we're looking at right now with the American election cycle too, right?
Right.
But my point is, I chose the military out of a lack of options. I was happy to serve. I was happy to get an education and build a career and, whatever else, but and be another generation of public servant, because my mom and my dad and my uncles and my aunts, everybody had served before me. But I mean, if I would have had a scholarship to go to college, if I would have had a talent that somebody recognized, if I would have had some other option to get out of rural Pennsylvania, I probably would have taken it. But the best option that came my way was a full ride scholarship to the Air Force Academy, which is the US's college for Air Force cadets, Air Force officers. I had to work my ass off to get that opportunity. And then when I went to the Air Force Academy, I was like the worst fit for the military ever. If in case it's not obvious.
Apparent now.
But I was a horrible pick for any kind of anything that had to do with the military. And all of my military friends who have seen me on these podcasts, who have watched me tell the truth about this. I mean, I was just talking to a buddy of mine who's a mentor, and he was like, yeah, you really were bad at it. And I was like, you see? Like there's so much power in being out of the military and saying, I was not good at being in the military.
No, but see, that's okay. So yes, there's power in that, but I'm going to argue that you don't hear anyone saying that. The people that, so let's pick at this bone for a second. The people that were in, that are out now, that have made their entire current identities wrapped around one story and one character. And when I was in, I was this. And then you talk to people who are around them and they're like, no, that's not reality at all. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there was that with me too. Like, I know I did one thing right, but I know I did a million things wrong, but I did when it mattered, the one thing right. So I'm like, I can stand in that, but I also am not going to build my entire identity around it. And when you start speaking about your life this way, other people are going to start talking like, no, I know this person. I know this person. You don't hear people like you admitting, hey, this was actually not my strength. So as much as you may think that's normal, it's not. Everybody else uses it to boost their ego in this community. And because I don't see you necessarily on just veteran podcasts, I notice that because you don't, people who stay just in the veteran podcast lane are like, rah, 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 rah. I see you outside of that lane. And that's why I feel like we're getting a different honesty too. It's not being met with other ego like this. It's being met with a curiosity. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
I appreciate your 2 cents on it. No, but the truth is, you know, I was a lackluster cadet. I barely graduated the Air Force Academy. I think I had a 2.4 GPA.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Like I was not good. I was smart enough to not get kicked out and not flunk out, but I wasn't smart enough to try hard and stay focused. I was too busy chasing tail and trying to be popular like everybody else who had a normal college experience. Yeah. But then when I left, I went into the Air Force. The Air Force taught me how to fly. The military was good to me. Like even as much of a shitbag as I was, the military kept being good to me. And I kept having, you know, decent enough supervisors that they kept putting opportunities in front of me and everybody tried to groom me. And then come 2007, the military in the United States was force shaping so that it could redirect more funds to the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. I was in the Air Force. They directed more resources to leave the Air Force to free up cash flow that could be sent to the Army and the Marine Corps. And I was one of those people that raised my hand and said, hey, I volunteer to leave early. If you want to let me out of my commitment early, I will gladly leave early. And in classic breakup fashion, what I thought was, what is the exact opposite of what I've been doing, right? Like when you've been dating a beautiful blonde who weighs 160 pounds, you're like, oh, we're breaking up. So what do I need? I need a feisty brunette who weighs 110 pounds. I need the total opposite, right? So I'm leaving the military. I'm like, what's the total opposite of the military? And I'm racking my brain and I land on the Peace Corps. Like, it's the total opposite. I can go in like save children in Africa and meet women with hairy legs and have tent sex on Tuesdays and just be happy. Yeah. So I started going down that application process. And it was in that process that I came across a CIA recruiter who said, hey, if you think you'd be good at that job, you should consider coming and interviewing with us.
How did that go? Like when you started hearing that, like, did your brain just immediately go, yes? Or was this like, I have to ruminate on this?
Oh, for me, it was an absolute yes. As soon as I knew I was dealing with CIA, for a while there, like CIA is super cagey. They're not like in the movies either. Like in the movies, it's kind of sexy cagey.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
this is annoying.
Yeah, it's just annoying, bureaucratic cagey where you're like, can you really not tell me your last name? Can you really not call me from the same phone number? Like, do I really have to put up with letters that come overnight FedEx and I have to sit on my ass until 9 o'clock the next day before I get your FedEx letter? Is this really how it has to work? So pain in the ass cagey. But so for a while there, I didn't know who I was dealing with. I just knew I was dealing with the federal government. So I was like jumping through the hoops, like maybe it's FBI, maybe it's DIA, maybe it's Homeland Security. I don't know who it is. Post 9/11, everybody's hiring. And then I found out it was CIA. And once I found out it was CIA, then my brain went crazy. Because honestly, what 27-year-old single veteran anything wouldn't get excited when they're like, CIA wants you? You're like, fuck yes. Yes, they want me. Nobody's ever wanted me ever.
Yeah.
But CIA wants me and I must be special.
Right. God, what a time, man. I tell you, that GWAT era. Whew,
Yeah,
was
right?
spicy. So let's okay, so I've heard you obviously discuss, and I want to try to get a different version of you out of this. So you go into CIA, and obviously you have all of the perspective of like every film and like every major thing, and then all the military. So you've got this expectation in your head. Was CIA, did it live up to it?
No. CIA is a no. And I'm saying this to every officer out there who's still undercover, who's been undercover, who works at CIA, who used to work at CIA. CIA is the biggest disappointment that you could ever imagine as a new recruit. Because you're thinking to yourself, you're going to walk into this amazing building. It's going to be kitted out with all modern tech. Everybody in that building is going to be a badass. They're going to look like a badass, dress like a badass, act like a badass. They're going to be a badass. And that's, of course, why you're there, because you're a badass too. So from the moment that I actually walked in on our orientation happens in an auditorium known as the Bubble. Okay. The Bubble is an external auditorium. Anybody who gets on Google Maps can literally look up Langley, Virginia, go to CIA headquarters. You'll see right outside the front door of the old headquarters building, you'll see a round circle. It's an auditorium. It's called the Bubble. It looks like a giant golf ball.
Can we sidebar for a second? Do they love how much you're just blowing everything about them out and you know they're hearing it?
I get some mixed feedback. Sometimes I get hate mail from CIA folks. Sometimes I get love letters from CIA people. Wow. What's nice though, Kelsey, is when you're in our position, all you have to do is tell the truth. There's enough people out there like bullshitting. All we have to do is tell the truth, and there's always an audience for the truth.
That's what it feels like lately. I don't know about you, but that's just like a shift I'm noticing as well. So I'm glad I'm not the only one that's...
Oh, yeah. You're not crazy. That's for real. There may not be a big audience that wants the truth, but there's some audience that wants the truth.
Oh, it's out there. I believe it. I believe it. So it didn't live up to the expectation, but you did do a lot of really cool things, and I would think that most people would find fascinating. So what I think was most fascinating to me about your career was that you found your wife in CIA, and that to me trumps everything else you've done. So how did that go? Because she was also in a similar position to you, no?
Yeah, exactly. So, going right back to that back to the Bubble. Yeah. I walked in on my first day of orientation, and all of a sudden, the other people who were being recruited didn't look like badasses. Like there were balding middle-aged men, and there were women in Velcro shoes, and there were, people with pot bellies, and there were people with glasses that were humongous and super thick. And I was like, oh, it's not really like an elite contingent, an elite cadre of badasses. This isn't the Navy SEALs, right? Mm-hmm. This is CIA. This is a bunch of smart people who can blend in and be forgotten, which absolutely crushes your ego, because you're like, oh shit, that means I'm just an awkward looking brown guy who's easily forgotten. I'm the opposite of being special. So that's how it starts. And then from that kind of foundation of being broken down, of realizing the fact that a good spy is forgettable, that a good spy is ignorable, that a good spy blends in. Once you kind of accept that, then you open the floodgates for all the skills, and the skills are pretty incredible. And then you start learning how to think, how to act, how to manipulate people, how to understand information, how to find secrets, how to steal secrets. And then you learn the technical skills, you learn the driving skills, you learn the shooting skills, and it just goes on and on. And then you start traveling the world, and then you start seeing new places, and all of a sudden, within about 8 months, you love the fact that you are bland and boring and forgettable, because you are the threat that nobody even knows is in the room.
There's something powerful about being that quiet threat. I can imagine it does come from obviously going from having the ego deflated to then almost expanded to a way and level that is concerning for one human to walk around with. But it's true, when you can be forgettable, you can blend in. But to be honest with you, you don't seem like you had that feeling about you. Maybe I'm just feeling into this, but it feels like you always knew you weren't the guy that blends in, but yet you just play the part really well. How did you handle that, like, dance, that different dance?
Yeah, it's the dance that we all really do understand. Like, everybody's trying to get attention without getting too much attention. Like, we're trying to get attention from the girls we like without getting attention from the girls we don't like. We're trying to get attention from the teachers that we want to impress without getting the wrong attention from the teachers that we know don't like us. We're trying to get the boss's attention without getting the boss's attention. Like, we're all kind of always dancing in this dance. So what CIA kind of taught me was that the struggle between being noticed and being successful, that struggle is artificial. You can be successful without being noticed, and you can be noticed and never be successful. And they kind of started showing me that through the lens of an operations officer, through the lens of the person who's supposed to find and steal secrets, the perfect person to steal secrets from is the person who has been successful enough to rise the ranks, right? To become a senior military leader in a foreign military, to become a senior Taliban official in the Taliban, to become a senior extremist leader in an extremist terrorist cell. Like, it takes real talent to climb up any ladder, whether it's an extremist ladder or whether it's a corporate ladder. When you find the person who has the talent to climb to the top, but they've always been unfulfilled because they've never been noticed. When you have that combination, you have the perfect target for espionage, because that person has a chip on their shoulder. That person has an axe to grind. That person's angry. That person's disappointed. That person's frustrated. That person's, they feel like something has been, like an injustice has been executed against them. And that's the exact recipe that you need in order to leverage CIA's skills for manipulating and creating a traitor out of somebody who was previously a patriot.
It's been wild to witness some of that come out too. Individuals in the United States, I believe Air Force and others. It's been, I can't lie to my husband. So I can't imagine being able to lie about having state secrets enough to be able to live that double life, the amount of stress it must take on the body. So talk to me a little bit about that with you too, right? Because stress and the way that our adrenals work and our cortisol works and everything, some of this is controllable to an extent, but with trauma or experience that can compound and compound and compound, and depending on how you handle it, it's going to affect your work. So walk me through a little bit of what that was like when you first got into CIA and how you handled the physical and psychological, not even traumas, but experiences you had gone through.
Yeah, so it's important to understand that, your standard job application takes like 30 to 45 days at most, right? You submit an application, you get a pre-interview, you get a second interview, maybe you talk to the direct supervisor, and then you're hired. And then, you're on the job in 30 or 45 days. When you apply to work for CIA or for any senior intelligence organization anywhere in the world, right? Whether that's FBI or whether that's Mossad or whether that's, SVR. When you apply for a intelligence position, you're talking a minimum of 9 months, pushing more towards 18 and 24 months. Now, why does it take so long? Yes, it takes long because there's a bureaucratic engine that just moves slowly, but it also takes a long time because there's very real rigor in the application process. So when I got asked to apply to CIA, because that's essentially how it works, everybody has to go through the application process. It's just a matter of whether you apply on your own, whether you're recommended, whether you're, grandfathered in, who knows what. So when somebody taps you on the shoulder, like you said, you still have to go through the bureaucratic process.
I'm still hoping and dreaming I'm going to get it one day. Just CSIS, what's up?
And CSIS is respectable too, man. You can't make fun of CSIS. They do a good job.
I do make fun of them a little bit, only because I live here.
It's fair. You're allowed. But I will say that I've been impressed by Canadian intelligence. All 12 of them. They're really good. Right.
Well, and notice how you said 12 though? We're going to touch that later.
But as you go through that application process, you're going through intelligence batteries, yes, but you're also going through personality batteries. You're going through psychological batteries. You're going through multiple types of in-person interviews, individual interviews, group interviews, meaning 4 or 5 people interviewing you. You go through role-playing interviews. You go through critical thinking interviews. It's a really trying process every step of the way, because what they're actually looking for is not what you think you're capable of. They're looking for how you are actually wired to behave. Because they know that rather than teaching people how to cope with stress,
Right.
They would rather bring in people who are wired to react to stress differently. So there's a term that we use called too dumb to quit. That's
Yeah,
who they're looking for. They're looking for people who are too dumb to quit, so that when an opportunity comes your way, they're like, hey, we need someone to blow up Iranian centrifuges in the middle of the Iranian desert. And oh,
right.
by the way, we're not going to claim responsibility that we know you, and we're
Right.
not going to give you enough resources to do it. And your evacuation route includes Pakistan, where you have to live in a tent for 2 months. Who's interested? And you need to have a bunch of people raise their hand. That only happens if you're too dumb to quit.
But you know, it's terrifying because I could pull out my Rolodex right now. And every single person in it
Would say yes, right?
we would all say yes.
Yes, that's a special person. That's a kind of person. That's a kind of person. I don't mean special like, they're a great warrior. That means like special short bus special. Like, who the fuck is going to say yes to that when they're at the prime of their physical peak conditioning and when they're like in the prime of their life and everything else? But people do, because CIA knows how to find those people. And those people are wired from very predictable backgrounds, right? Broken homes, traumatic childhoods, high achieving parents that have created high achieving children. Military backgrounds are dominant in large part because the military is one of those organizations where it's like, hey, put up or shut up, get to the top of the class or you don't count. Like it creates this constant sense of needing outside validation.
And brought to you by Culture. You guys know I am so dedicated to my mental health and my physical resilience. I'm always on the lookout for the next tool that makes the biggest difference. And that's why I'm so excited to share with you my new partnership with Culture. They are Canada's #1 cold plunge, and they are trusted by over 40,000 people across North America. The benefits are incredible, whether it's better sleep, reduced stress, faster recovery, or just more energy at the end of the day. And with Culture's unmatched quality and world-class customer care, this is the brand that I trust, not only for me, but my family. So if you're ready to challenge yourself, to change your life, improve your life, then go over to culture.com and use the code Kelsey at checkout. It's going to give you $250 off your first purchase. So what are you waiting for? Go on over, culture.com. Use the code Kelsey. Let's go. This episode is brought to you by Mindful Meds. I love Mindful Meds for so many reasons. I know that you guys have seen me using them for quite a few years, and there's a reason for that. When they're tested and safe and researched, how can you go wrong? This company is one of my favorites for several reasons. I use them with my clients, with myself, and with my family members. They have active ingredient microdoses, and they have functional mushrooms. They're going to help keep you from getting sick. That'll help uplift your life, keep you moving, and open your heart. And when you go to mindfulmeds.io and at checkout, you use the code BRASS, all one word, they're going to give you 15% off today. So let me ask you, are you ready to join the mindful movement? Go check them out at mindfulmeds.io today.
And that's the perfect CIA officer, somebody who needs outside validation, who needs to belong to CIA, whose ego needs to be fed by being told, you're the tip of the spear, you're doing things that nobody else can do. And oh, by the way, your successes will never be known. You'll never get an award. You'll never have a pat on the back. You're such a hero for sacrificing for what others will never know. Like, you've got to be kind of fucked up to live with that.
God, so many of my friends. So then explain to me, what part of that for you was the fulfillment? What part did that hit for you? What note?
Yeah, so it goes all the way back to my childhood. My father died before I was born. My father was killed in a violent crime in California when I was like a month away from being born. I was born to a single mom. My mom was a first-generation immigrant from Mexico to the United States, and I was without a father. My father and my mother got, they got married only because my mom was pregnant. Latino household, Catholic household. Like, it was a total shit show from the beginning. So I grew up with my mom and my grandma in El Paso, Texas, just making it work. And then eventually my mom remarried, and she remarried not for love, Kelsey. She remarried out of very responsible decision-making. A nice white guy who was 13 years older than her, who hated her family, and moved my mom and I up to Pennsylvania, as far away from El Paso as you could possibly get, right? And then I grew up in this mixed household with two half sisters, because my father and my mother then, or my stepdad and my mother, went on to have daughters. And that was just how I grew up. So I was never good enough to be my stepdad's son. We didn't look the same. We didn't have the same last name. Like, he was white, I was brown. It just didn't work. My mom was trying to pretend she wasn't brown. She had two white daughters. She had a white husband. She was trying to get along and be an RN nurse in a predominantly white neighborhood in a predominantly rural county. So that was the life that I grew up in. So I was never good enough to get the pretty girl for the prom date, never good enough to be picked first for the kickball team. And that was just how it works. So my survival instinct was, I had to try harder, work harder, do anything I possibly could. And I couldn't trust my parents along the way. So I had to do I had to work as hard as I possibly could and lie to everyone. Lie to mom, lie to dad, lie to teachers. I couldn't show my weakness. I couldn't show my fears. I couldn't show my vulnerabilities, because to do so would just amplify the fact that I already looked and sounded different. The bastard brown kid in a white neighborhood. Like, I'm not a big person for race. That's not what I'm trying to say. But your question was,
you're not that guy, so I'm not worried about it.
But your question was like, what did it fulfill for me? Nobody ever validated that I was good enough until I went to CIA. And then CIA was like, you know what? My name when I first got recruited, my name was Andrew Gregg. My name changed at CIA. When I first got recruited, I was Andrew Gregg. And they were like, you know what, Greg? You're going to be awesome because no one's going to see you coming. You're a brown guy. We're going to send you all over the world where brown guys blend in. You're just personable enough that nobody thinks that you're a threat. You're not big and strong enough that anybody's going to think that you're former military, right? Like, you're going
to give it away.
You're going to be the perfect guy to sit with scumbags and get scumbags to feel like they're sitting with another scumbag. And that's going to work out well. And it really did. So that was where I found my validation, is I was like, oh, you know what? I'm a very good hero disguised as a scumbag who will never get credit for what I do. And that's okay, because it's not important what I do. It's important that the nation gets the secrets that I need to collect.
Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. That's that is the story, though, isn't it? Obviously, it's why they recruit from backgrounds like that. But when you think about it and you think back to people in your life, it's like, how many people could have easily been recruited by some form of intelligence agency, and no one would bat an eye. So now that you went through the process and you started actually becoming an operator and you were out in the field and living that life, did you still feel as passionate about it while you were doing it, or did it become a job for you?
So the nice thing is, it never became a job. It never felt like being a busboy or being a waiter, or even being in the military. The military felt like a job. It always felt like a lifestyle, and it felt like a challenging but exciting lifestyle, because you still had to do your cover job during the day, and you could only do your operational work after your cover job ended. So weekends, lunch hours, whatever it might be. So it never felt like a job, but you very quickly become disenchanted with what you're actually doing. And that's really ultimately what led me to leave in 2014. Is I woke up around maybe 2011. I woke up to the fact that all the same skills that they had taught us to manipulate these, cognitively flawed people overseas. Because remember, I said somebody who's achieved a great deal but never been noticed is the perfect person to steal secrets from, right? Well, guess who the fuck CIA recruits? People who have achieved a great deal but have never been noticed. So you start to realize that CIA's form of management, CIA's form of supervisory training, CIA's culture of developing people internally is the same as their culture for manipulating spies. They're just manipulating their own internal staff, because it's the only thing we've been trained to do. And we're all gifted at lying, deceiving, manipulating, and conniving our way to the top. That's what we're good at, because it was what we were foundationally, it's how we were wired. So it's not CIA's fault that their operators essentially end up backstabbing each other until they get to the top or until they leave. But that is a reality that they have to deal with. And I woke up to that reality in about 2011. And then my wife and I were married at the time, and I kind of introduced her to the idea. I was like, hey, do you think that maybe we're being manipulated in our careers too? And she was like, no, that's not what's happening. Like, we're quiet, silent sentinels. We're here to like protect the American people and enforce democracy worldwide. And then once that seed was planted, then she started seeing it too. And by the time 2013 rolled around and we had our first child, it was very clear to both of us, like, holy shit, if we choose to stay in this career, we can see what our future will look like. Because all you have to do is look at what an officer looks like at 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years. Like, you know, this is the stage where they become alcoholics. This is the stage where their marriage falls apart. This is their stage where they have a girlfriend that's 10 years younger than them. This is the stage where they alienate their children. Yep. You can watch it play out in front of you with the other generations of officers. So we decided, hey, what would it be like if we left? Because nobody left. In 2014, attrition at CIA was less than 1%. Nobody left. And if they did leave, it was because they retired and came back in as a contractor the next day. So we kind of took a chance and we were like, hey, we could try to build a completely different life if we chose to put our relationship and our family first instead of putting CIA first.
Okay, so explain to me in 2011 what kicked that off, or can you discuss any of that? Because something must have set it off, because that doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah, so my wife and I were what's known as a tandem operating couple. So we were two complementary disciplines.
You were the Americans.
That's the sexy version of it.
Right.
Remember, everything about CIA is disappointing. So just think of the Americans and then be disappointed. And that was us.
Perfect. Oh, it's good.
So we're out there doing what we're doing, and policy changed. So it was a year that there was a huge change in national security prioritization from the White House all the way down through the Congress and the House, right, the Senate. And all of the priorities changed in an instant. So all these operations that we had been working on and building were suddenly defunded. And the funding was redirected in a new direction that made no sense for national security. And we realized it made no sense for national security because it wasn't for national security. It was for political clout under the Obama administration because he was in his getting ready for his second term. So we realized, like, oh my gosh, we're just tools of policy. We're not tools of national security. We're tools of policy. And that was kind of the first domino that got me thinking in that direction, because all of a sudden I went, like, for all intents and purposes, I went from collecting secrets about terrorist cells to collecting secrets about the rice trade. And I'm like, why do I feel like collecting secrets about the price of rice in Cambodia doesn't compare to, the number of terrorist bomb makers that are happening in Kuala Lumpur? It doesn't seem like these two things are compatible. And then the direction just kept on coming. And being at that point in my career, I was just senior enough that I could ask my supervisors what's going on. Like, when you're a junior officer, you don't ask questions. But once you're like approaching that mid-careerist, now you can go to your supervisor and be like, I don't really understand this. Can you explain this to me? And then you start realizing the politics of what happens. And that if you want to be promoted to the next level, if you want the next case, if you want the next duty assignment, you have to play a game. And that political game is the same that we all play in any job, right? Don't piss off the boss. Don't make your boss look bad. Clients, big clients get everything. Small clients get shit on. Like, there's a game everywhere. There's a game, right? The boss's son is your supervisor, so you can't talk shit to the boss's son, or else it's going to make you look bad to your whatever. We all know the game. The game existed at CIA too. And seeing that the game trumped national security objectives immediately undermined the whole reason I had signed up. Like, the whole reason I went to CIA, the whole reason my wife went to CIA was because we honestly believed the work that we were going to do would keep our families safe, our parents, our sisters, our brothers, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, right? One day, our work would keep our own children safe. Well, being able to negotiate the dominant rice price at the G20 summit does not actually contribute to national security.
That's what blows my mind, is because it feels like it's so obvious now. It's not even being hidden. It's so blatantly in your face. And it feels like it's so blatantly in your face because they really just understand that the majority of people It's not that they're blind, deaf, and dumb. I mean, there's a subset. We're not going to not acknowledge that. But they're so distracted, so intentionally, so strategically that they're like, I can put this on the cover of Time magazine and it won't matter at all. No one will react. No one will question it. It'll be a 30-second story. My God, it feels like Trump's shooting was on like shorter than anything else I've ever seen in a news cycle. So it's like this idea that they're flaunting it. They've got to the point where they're flaunting it, and it's irritating to me.
Well, I think what we're really seeing isn't, I'm not going to give any government credit for being able to run a super secret campaign or a deep state. I'm not going to give any government credit. They can't even fucking send you your driver's license on time when you go register for a new state. So you can't give them credit of running some supreme it's
not happening.
Yeah, some conspiracy that nobody's discovered. There's a razor that we use, a rule of thumb that we use in analysis that says never subscribe to conspiracy, that which can be explained through idiocy.
Yes.
And that's really what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a bureaucracy that's slow and broken, that can't keep up with the news cycle. But what they've discovered is that because people already assume that the government is so incompetent, then they're always looking for the next thing to focus on. And in the commercial side of things, outside of government, in the business side of things, all businesses want is attention, just like what we all want. So even if something like the attempted assassination of a former president happens, it's really just a matter of time before celebrity news takes over, or some sort of criminal news takes over, or, you know, some travesty abroad happens, or some natural disaster happens, or who knows what, right? The stock market bounces. There's always going to be something that helps. So what the government has learned to do, and what we were trained to do too, was just, hey, do everything you can to stay out of the Washington Post. And if you end up in the Washington Post, don't ever talk about it. Because after about 14 days, they'll be talking about something else, and you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah, see, I wish I knew that a long time ago. It's like you either learn the hard way or you don't learn at all. There is no, I feel like, smooth, sophisticated way to learn these behaviors in the public eye. And that's why it feels like so many people fuck them up so obviously, because they're just not taught the skills that CIA is taught, which is how to handle and manipulate situations, which kind of brings me to where I wanted to go with you, which is like what you are doing now. I mean, I've heard you talk about your life before, and your wife's story is your wife's story to tell, so I won't pry on that. But it is interesting to kind of see how you've taken what you've done and you haven't made it your identity, but you've used your past identity to create this, you know, like I said, you're on tour, you're doing these things, you've got courses, you've got your social media platforms and stuff. So talk to me about the absolute different life now that you're leading, because it is so different than CIA.
Yeah, so what you're referencing really is the company I built called Everyday Spy. My company is a very public, I was just talking to my staff earlier today, like we are a digital publishing company. It's the exact opposite of CIA. CIA is a covert secret keeping organization. We are an overt secret sharing organization. Like our job, our mission is to take everything that we've learned at CIA, everything we learned skill-wise, everything we learned geopolitically, everything we learned about analysis and operational planning and operational execution, take all of it and encapsulate it into a learnable format for other people to use so that they can break barriers in their own everyday life. And a lot of those things are secret things, but they're not national security secrets. They're just the secret that nobody ever talked about. Right? Because CIA deals with national security secrets, without a doubt. However, only about 2% of what they do is really, truly classified. And what I mean by that is they have a very specific definition that says that they classify sources and methods. Sources of intelligence collection, so individuals by name who are giving secrets about their country, and methods, the specific ways that those individuals share their secrets, right? Whether they share them on whatever, napkins or paper or radio transmissions or whatever else. As long as you're not talking about the sources of information or the methods by which they share that information, everything else is not classified. It might still be secret, but it's not classified. Well, that means the way that we work out is not classified. That means the way that we deal with stress is not classified. That means the fact that there are fucking old ladies who walk through the hallways in white Velcro shoes because they make up the contingent of the logistical force and the analytical force, that's not a secret. Like, that's not classified, even though nobody knows it. You know what I mean? So it's been this amazing opportunity to shed light on what CIA really is. Because if you understand what CIA really is, then you understand what Mossad really is, and what SVR really is, and what MSS really is, right? You start to see what the intelligence community actually is. And what it boils down to is it's just a bunch of everyday people who are given unique skills and unique access to do incredible things. But they're still just everyday people. Like, one of the things that blew my mind, Kelsey, was when I learned how many CIA officers pack their lunch. It's such a stupid thing. Nobody ever thinks about it, right? But when you go to lunch at CIA and you look around the dining hall, there's thousands of people in the headquarters building. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing Target lunch bags, and you're seeing Walmart lunch bags, and you're seeing Amazon Marketplace lunch bags. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's just like being back in middle school where everybody's trading their pickle for somebody else's Oreos, for somebody else's Twinkie, for somebody's bubble gum. Like, you see people literally playing card games at lunch. They're playing Pinochle. They're playing Magic the Gathering. They're playing whatever, right? It's so mundane that it's actually shocking. It's actually mundane enough to catch your attention. Whereas if you did the same thing at, Google headquarters, you wouldn't notice or care. Right. Because of course, these are just normal people. They're just smart, geeky people. Well, guess what CIA is full of? A bunch of normal, smart, geeky people who have just enough of a fucked up history that they're okay lying to everybody and ruining lives as long as those are foreign lives.
Yeah, it's so insane when you say it just like that, because that's really what it is. It's this manipulation of human beings and this consistent ability to just fuck someone's brain up. And it's so sad, but it's like, when you look at it on the face of what it is, it gives individuals that, like you said, are just everyday people just going about their lives. That to me is more scary. And I think that's why when I look at kind of, not to shift gears so aggressively, but we're going. When I look at things like what's going on right now, whether that's Canada's inability to keep terrorists out of the country and give them citizenships through visas, which is super obvious, or it's to watch what's happening in America and the sheer just number game based on the amount of people, type of people. As we keep narrowing down, you're going to get a subset of terrorism. You're going to get a subset of extremism in there. So just to, on its face, look at it without any sort of intelligence lens and just go, yeah, you can tell this was going to be a problem. You could tell this was going to be an issue. So why is it that it feels like so many people, and again, the people running the government are not some super smart individual. So I do understand that Trudeau is not brilliant, but I do wonder how the hell so many people could be failing at their jobs across the board and no one notice.
I think people do notice. That's where we have to be honest about ourselves and honest about each other, right? So one of the things that we learn at CIA, we break all people up into two groups. Okay. And it's for simplification. It's not because it's academically sound. So anybody who any psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, anybody out there with an academic background, just know now, I am not from an academic background and you will disagree with most of what I say, but that's fine because you're wrong and the reality of things is right. But the truth is, when you simplify a concept to an extreme, it's easier for people to understand it. And once people understand it, then it's easier to understand the nuances of what's more complicated. So the super simplification is we break everybody down into two groups, the trained and the untrained. So you're either trained in tradecraft and espionage, or you're not trained in tradecraft and espionage. So that means everybody who is a U.S. intelligence officer, a foreign intelligence officer, a military intelligence officer, anybody who's been detached to or attached and detached to an intelligence unit has gone through this training. Mm-hmm. So there's people who understand the nature of intelligence and they're trained. Everybody else is considered untrained. The people who are trained already understand that intelligence is it's a two-sided coin. There's offensive intelligence and defensive intelligence. The people who are untrained don't realize that. They don't even realize that intelligence has a process. They don't realize there's offensive and defensive intelligence. They might parrot a line that they saw from a movie once, but they don't actually get the purpose or the intent behind it. So as a trained intelligence officer, what I see happening in the public writ large is that they see people fail and they realize that they can't do anything about it except bitch and moan and complain. And then after they've bitched and moaned and complained, they feel like they have contributed to highlighting the problem and they move on to the next thing. Because everyday life just keeps on grinding. No matter how upset you are, at the end of the day, your kids still need to eat. Your partner still wants to fool around. You still have movies that are sitting in your Netflix queue that you haven't watched yet. So, President Biden fucks up. We complain about it. We go back to Netflix that night, right? President Harris is endorsed by President Biden. We bitch about it. And then we go back to Netflix that night. Like, that is how people work, because all of the power that we as citizens in democracy actually have, we've given up. So we don't participate. We don't keep ourselves informed. We don't use community the way community is supposed to be used. And once every 4 years in the United States, for about 3.5 months, hundreds of millions of dollars go into a campaign to get everybody excited so that 60% of the people can do something and the other 40% can convince themselves that they're useless.
It's so simplistic and irritating at the same time. When you explain it on its face, doesn't it just seem like overuse, like just mass spending that could be put towards something so much more productive? Like it's just insane. Like it's insanity. It feels crazy. It feels like a repetition thing that I can't seem to understand why people are so good with every 4 years. I mean, I watch you guys from afar. I'm in America, once a month, once every other month. I have investment in America, meaning business, and I care about where America goes. I'm also your hat, and we're so on fire, but yet America doesn't seem to pay attention to what's happening above them, the sheer terrifying tyranny that is falling around me, and unbelievable amounts of destabilizing immigration policy. And the fact of the matter is, it's still happening up here, and it's going to affect you the same way Bill C-11 affected you, the same way you got the TikTok bill 18 months, almost to the day I said you would. It's so funny to be able to see these things happen and go, it's going to have a trickle-down effect. So how do you explain to people that if you don't somehow educate yourself or participate in it, like, you're going to keep going down this cycle? Like, how do we get others to see the things that you've been trained to see, maybe in like digestible ways? Like, your clips are great. I know your program's great, but if you were to tell the everyday person, like, if you just paid attention to these 3 things, you could make better decisions for your family. You could see the world a little bit clearer. And maybe because you understand, you'll be calmer.
So here's the secret, Kelsey, that nobody wants to say out loud, but that is super powerful from CIA. You can't save everybody. Some people, the biggest contribution they can make in this world is to be a cog. The biggest contribution for them is to sacrifice themselves. The biggest contribution they can make is literally to be left behind and forgotten. In fact, if you look at it empirically, mathematically, there's something called the 80-20 rule. According to the 80-20 rule, 80% of the impact is going to be created by 20% of the people. So what does that mean for the other 80% of the people? It means they will never do anything of any significance. So why bother investing in that 80%? That is how the government thinks. And we need to understand that, because that is not flawed thinking. That is empirically, mathematically sound thinking. 80% of the population will do nothing of significance. Their entire existence really is going to be born, work your ass off, fail over and over again, pay your taxes, and die as quickly as possible so you're not a drain on the system. That's just the way it is. This is the power of thinking and acting like a trained intelligence officer. Once you realize that you have a limited amount of effort in your business, in your life, in your relationships, you only have a certain amount of time and you don't know how much time that is. You want to make sure that 80% of your time is spent doing things that make a difference, because everybody else is wasting the 80% of their life, right? You can't, 100% of your life is never going to work. Empirically, it's not going to work. It's always going to divide out into approximately 80-20. So that means that business owners, you don't need to focus on 100% of your customers. You only need to focus on 20% of your customers. And of the 20% of your customers that you're focusing on, 80% of those customers are only going to buy from you one time. 20% of those customers are going to buy from you multiple times. So you can really, really only focus your resources on about 7% of everybody who's buying from you, right? When we make these, for me as a content creator, I'll be totally honest with you. 80% of the people who watch this video are going to do dick all with it. They're never going to change. They're never going to apply any of the information. They're probably turning it off right now. Fuck you, goodbye. That's fine, because we don't create this for them. You're right. We create this for the 20% who's going to watch this shit to the end. The 20% that's nodding their head as they hear us talk. The 20% that says, oh, I never thought of it that way, right? Why am I spinning my wheels trying to save 80% of my relationships and ignoring the 20% of my relationships that are easy? What would happen if I put all of my effort into the relationships that are easy and make me feel good and are productive, and I said, fuck it, to the 80% of relationships that I don't care about, right? Why do I feel obligated to my mom who doesn't feel obligated to me? Why do I feel obligated to my boss who doesn't feel obligated to me? Why do I feel obligated to my church that doesn't feel obligated to me? Oh, wait. You mean there's an option where I don't have to do that? And even better, scientifically, sociologically, and psychologically, the evidence suggests I will be more successful when I cut those bastards out of my life. It changes the game. It's what changes $100,000 a year businesses into $500,000 a year businesses. What changes struggling influencers into successful influencers. It's what changes normal people into intelligence operatives.
God, I feel like I'm sitting in front of myself. It's so nice to talk with you. You get it. You get it, buddy. I know that sounds ridiculous to say and to for me to say to you, but it's so refreshing. Fuck. Thank you. Thank you for actually not sitting there and talking about CIA like this, but fucking saying what it is and just being honest, because these are the tools and these are the things that I've been trying to explain to people. You don't need to be fucking Joe Rogan to have an impact on the world. You can do the things with the right people and say it in a way that's going to be heard differently. It's not rocket science, man. It's not.
It's one of those secrets that shouldn't be secret. It's one of those secrets that people just don't talk about, right? Think about, there are so many people out there that have almost no audience, right? Tiny audiences. Look at my podcast. Has less than 100,000 viewers. And I think we just crossed 104,000 viewers or something like that, right? 104,000 subscribers. We are nowhere near the big podcasters in the world. But we have cultivated that channel to target the 20% of the 20%. So we have outstanding engagement and outstanding community, and people make friends, and people enroll in our programs, and people have life change. And once you change somebody's life, you never forget them. The proof is in the pudding. Every one of us remembers some high school or middle school teacher. Maybe one, maybe two. But you had dozens of teachers. So what makes those one or two so memorable? They did something that changed your life. They taught you something. They showed you something. You had an epiphany in their classroom. Who knows what it was, but they stick with you forever. Well, what happens on the business side is if you run a business and some element of your business changes someone's life, they never forget about your business. And then you end up having a lifetime customer and a lifetime customer value that's enough to grow the business forever. That's the exact antithesis of what's happening in the news cycle. That's the exact opposite of what you see most influencers doing. Most people are trying to create something entertaining for this exact moment, not something life-changing that has material or significant impact. When you focus on making impact, then you only have to do it once and it lasts forever. Otherwise, you're always stuck coming back to the same stupid hamster wheel of whatever ridiculous thing is happening right now in the world.
But I also think that most people who try to do the thing, they spin, they get frustrated, and they either hit it or they don't. And you can see when it shifts. I feel like I can see it in people when it shifts. It's not just clients, but it could be shows. It could be other people you're around, maybe in your community that are maybe you're looking to guidance for, and you see a shift within them, and it's like a gear up. There is a moment that does happen. So I've been curious though, why you decided, and obviously I'm sure the intelligence thinking obviously comes into play here, but why you decided to start tackling and putting yourself out there on a podcast. Because to be honest with you, man, you came hot and fast out of nowhere, and you've been on like every single show I have plus more. And so I'm going like, where the fuck did you come from? And because people listen, I hear the story, which is like, he's a psyop. And I'm like, stop it. The girl on Instagram that carries the gun in her tits, she's a psyop. Relax about it. I mean, and if you are, dude, maybe you're just like the best at it ever, but just based on, and maybe it's, hold on. Maybe it's that reverse psychology, right? Where like the CIA is like talk mad shit about it. Like just like really give all of the tips away. Like I can't see it, but like what brought you, man? Because something had to.
So first of all, it's important to understand that, and you know this as well as I do, nobody comes from nowhere.
No, for sure. So give me more.
It takes work, right? So I really became known after Lex Friedman interviewed me in August of 2022. Mm-hmm. But I had been podcasting and speaking on stages for 2-3 years before that. I started in 2019. But you speak on a 200 person YouTube channel. You speak on a 150 person YouTube channel. You speak on these smaller channels or these smaller podcasts that don't even have a YouTube presence, because back in 2021, right, it wasn't really common to have a YouTube podcast. Most people still had audio only podcasts. So, I was working to try to get my message out there, and I had, tens of customers, and I was doing, some coaching and some really private consulting in my hometown where people knew me and trusted me and whatever else. But in 2022, I got a message from Lex to come do his podcast, and he found me. I don't know how. I think he found me from another podcast I had done with like a medium-sized Florida podcaster named Concrete, Danny Jones.
Yeah, Danny Jones, yeah.
Yeah. So something about what I was talking about was interesting to Lex. And then when I went on Lex's show, it's funny because there were a number of things that happened right before I went on Lex's show. First, I lost a tooth.
Oh my God, yes.
So I had this gap in my face, and I was like, it was so awkward because I was like, I can't believe I look like a hillbilly, and I'm going on this podcast that has 1.7 million subscribers or whatever else, but I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm going to make it happen anyways. And then I get on Lex's show, and I got smart on Lex a little bit before I went there, but I didn't want to be so smart that I, fanboyed out or whatever else. And then I found out that we disagreed on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm just going to stand my ground and disagree, even though I don't know if this is good or bad. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realized that people liked the fact that I disagreed with Lex, that I was a different voice. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of learned from that. Now, truly what happened after Lex happened, a series of people who follow Lex very closely, Chris Williamson and some others, immediately invited me onto their show because they were like, hey, if you were on Lex, we want you on our show because we're going to feed off of his algorithm. Because when his algorithm hits, it's going to send you to, it's going to, be good for us. So I was just a dancing monkey, right? With the fucking symbols. Yeah. Nobody cared about me. Nobody cared about my opinion. They were just like
numbers, baby.
Yes. They were like, we need your name, your SEO, because once Lex puts money behind you, we're going to capitalize too. And you know what? That's fine. I'm used to being a tool. I was the fucking CIA dildo for who knows how long. Just do whatever you want to do with me. That's what I'm here for. Right. So let's go do what we got to do. Yeah. But what I didn't realize then that I realize now is that when you create content, especially content with people who have the wherewithal to keep making more content, the 20% of creators who keep creating rather than the 80% that give up, that content lives forever. So now, like, it just keeps growing and snowballing and growing and snowballing. And people want to say that I'm a psyop, that CIA planted me. That's fine. Again, the rule of incompetence shows that that's very unlikely. But if you want to believe it, believe it.
But also, like, if you're in the game at all, you understand you understand one thing. Maybe you don't, because your penis might take over for that. But if one person green lights you, it's no different than the military community there, sweetheart. If one person green lights you, the second will and the third will, unless some people don't have you on because they only want penises on. That is also a real reality. I've actually considered transitioning just to see if I can get on a couple new shows. But it's interesting because that's how I've seen it happen for you. And like you said, I'm so glad how you address that, because there is that conversation of, where did you come from? I've heard that before. To me, I've heard it. I've seen it with you. It's, where did you come from? It's like, well, no, it's the 10,000 hours. It's the time that you didn't see where I was doing this, this, and this, and this, and strategically working my way in. But once you're in, if you can get in, it made total sense. I knew as soon as I saw you on Lex, that wasn't going to be the only episode I saw. But what I do love so much about listening to some of the things that you said on different platforms is you can gauge the person enough to gauge where you can go, to the depths in which you can go, and how far you can kind of go leeway wise, meaning conspiratorial versus applicable real life skill tool. Lex was very different than Steven was very different than Chris is very different, right? Notice I said man. So I think it's interesting to see a different side of you a little bit. And I want to look at some other things that maybe you haven't looked at with those guys. And I want to go a little bit more in depth with your emotions and how you've been able to cope. Because like you said, you're taught tools, you're taught lessons, but everybody who listens to the show is pretty much a dude. And they also come from backgrounds like yours. And they have done the tools and the therapies and the things and the this and the that. So I've got a unique experience here to be able to ask you some more depth here. So can you go into whatever makes you most comfortable and then slightly get a little more uncomfortable and tell me how you got out of it?
Yeah. So, you know what, I think one of the things that that gets to what you're trying to talk about here is that imposter syndrome is real. It's very, very real. When you can achieve, you are one of those people who feels like you got lucky for achieving. When you can't achieve, you feel like you're one of those people that deserves to achieve. So if you're sitting there feeling like, you know, you're the shit and no one's ever noticed, you can't actually achieve dick. But if you're the kind of person that has achieved incredible things and you're like, it's all going to end one day. It's a house of cards and it's all going to come crumbling down because I'm a total phony. You might actually be the kind of person that can make it, as long as you don't self-destruct. CIA taught us that we all have a big self-destruct button on our chest. We call it our red button of self-destruction. And CIA taught us that because if you're ever captured, if you're ever interrogated, you have to trust that as long as there's plausible deniability, you won't be executed, right? As long as there's a shadow of a doubt that you might not be a CIA officer, there's a chance that you'll survive. But as soon as you fucking hit that red button, as soon as you're like, you got me. Oh, sorry, Russia, my bad. I thought I could do this. You know, I really am a spy. You really should just send me back to America. You don't need to create a big international incident. Like, just, yeah, that's when they shoot you because they know they can, because the president will deny you, and the list goes on and on and on. So you can't press that red self-destruct button. So because I learned that at CIA, now in my business, in my speaking practice, in my media presence, I mean, I've been on History Channel and NBC and ABC and some of the big national broadcasting networks here in the United States. I never fucking feel comfortable. Like, it's never a comfortable thing. You always wonder which interview will be the interview where I blow up. Which one is it going to be? Which one is it going to be that tanks my career? Which one is it going to be where some group of like far left or far right crazies take my message out of context and then I have a shooter at my front door? When's it going to happen? Because it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And you have to show up every day knowing that there's a firing line and hoping that they're just a bunch of bad shots. So there's a big element of that. And the only reason I keep going is because I know that the fastest way to fail is to quit. You can fail later. You can fail slowly. You can fail possibly never if you keep trying. But as soon as you quit, you're fucking done. And in our world, like whether it's business, whether it's media, whether it's, you know, a career in sales or otherwise, there's always somebody right behind you ready to take your place because you are 100% disposable. Joe Rogan is disposable. Lex Friedman is disposable. You know, I'm disposable. You're disposable. And being in the military and being in CIA, being in service to your nation, you learn that that is true. There's always some dumbass waiting to be some other person who's too dumb to quit waiting right behind you. And that's the truth of it. And we all realize that. I was on a show with History Channel and I was talking to a director of that show. And, you know, he was saying that there may or may not be another season that gets awarded. And if there is another season, he hopes that I come back. And I was like, oh, I don't really know if I want to come back. Like, it's not a lot of fun making TV shows. And he was like, it doesn't matter if it's fun. He's like, you don't know how long your flame of relevancy is going to last. So you have to stay in that flame because it will go out. Something will happen and people won't care anymore. And if you leave early, you're just cutting yourself out of the opportunities that could have come later. So, I mean, that ideal, I struggle with imposter syndrome. I struggle with energy to keep going. I know that one of these days I'm going to self-destruct, but you just got to keep pushing because hopefully it'll make a good interview episode when it happens.
Well, you're welcome to self-destruct here anytime. I self-destruct quite frequently, and maybe that's what my problem is. I should stop doing that. But it's interesting to see the style, man. And it's not to like nitpick, but I'm genuinely fascinated by kind of what I've seen and how I've watched you move from afar. I'm one of those people who watches before I reach out. Like, I really watch. I think it matters who you talk to because once you hit a certain level with shows, just whether it's numbers, what you're doing, what other people are doing around you, it becomes important who you talk to and how you speak to them. And I think with you, kind of watching you for as long as I have, I've seen you have your talking points and your things, but I'm starting to see it feels more rebellious. It feels a little more, not honest, but just like, fuck you, I do not care anymore what you have to say. And you kind of got into that at the beginning. So I want to touch on that a little bit. Has the online thing been different? What's kind of happened since you've now, because it's not just one show you've done, you've snowballed them all quite aggressively. So that comes with relevancy, like you said, all the time. So what have you noticed? How has that affected your family? And most importantly, how the hell do you post your kids' pictures on social media and not have a meltdown every day?
So I try to bury my kids' digital footprint pretty effectively. But yeah, you can put them up on social media when you homeschool them and you have a private educator and all that other stuff, right? So, but my point with all that is, so part of what I think is really valuable about anybody who's trying to build a business and anybody who's trying to build a media following or a social media following, you don't know your voice when you start. You find it over time. You start to find, you know, under stress, under pressure, under, you know, the gun, you start to see what you actually care about versus what you just talk about. And one of the things that I've discovered is that I'm not really in this to help everybody. Like when I first started coming out of government, coming out of public service, I was like, oh, maybe I can help people. And then I was reminded, like, I don't even fucking like people. So why would I want to help people? What I want to do is I want to help the minority of people who are going to create the majority of impact.
Yeah.
Right. And what's funny is I've always been that guy. Even at CIA, I was dealing with shitbags who were the minority of people with the majority of impact. You deal with the, you know, the terrorist fundraiser. That dude has a lot of impact, right? You deal with the person who's at the heart of smuggling human beings from, you know, Israel or India across to Brazil. That person has a great deal of impact, but they're just one person and they're not good people. And that's the other thing I've discovered. You know, when you're dealing with people who have the real potential to make an impact, they live hard lives. They're not goody two-shoes. They're not people who like follow the rules and did things the right way and everybody likes them. Generally, they are people that other people hate. They break the rules, they skirt the laws, but they do it because they have some sort of mission they very much believe in. And when you stop to think about their mission through their eyes, you can understand why they care so much. Right? I have met so many centimillionaires, people who run businesses that are $500,000 or more. And they're not nice. They're not friendly. They're not kind. They're not generous. They're kind of assholes, but they've done an incredible thing. And they've built an enterprise that literally creates thousands of jobs, transforms the American economy, creates a tax base that generates new weaponry, new technology. Like, they're incredible, incredible individuals. And you can't not get behind their mission when you see how dedicated they are to their mission. They may cheat on their wives. They may have kids with 3 or 4 different, women. Who knows? They may have the worst habits in the world, but you can't judge them on that, because that's not what they're putting their effort into. They're putting their effort into something else. So when you focus on that, you can appreciate the person who has broken their family and who is addicted to cocaine. You can appreciate that person just as much as you can appreciate the stay-at-home mother who has dedicated her life to her children, who has sacrificed her career for her family, because they've just got 2 different missions. And what I have found is that for my children, the future that I want for them, I can get them to that future faster if I focus on the people of impact, rather than the everyday person who's not going to make an impact. But the cool thing is, the person who makes impact tomorrow, right now, they're an everyday person, right? Tomorrow's owner of $100 million company right now runs a $500,000 a year company. And when you speak the truth to that person, they understand that you're on their side, because they can already visualize themselves as being one of those impact makers.
That's what's fascinating is, I think so many people come out of service and want to keep providing service. I know that's at least what I did afterward. And you get to a point where you kind of start to feel like an asshole, and it feels foreign, but yet you recognize it almost like you've experienced it before. And it's like, you got to get to these levels to be able to see that you can't help everyone, or you can't please everyone, because not everybody is ready to be helped, number one. And number two, not everybody wants the help. And you have to also be okay with that. But it's the 20%. I want to talk a little bit more about the 20%, because that 20%, they're still going to go through the normal up and down struggle of finding the purpose and the direction and the thing that they want to do to change the world. So how do you suggest people even start down that pathway where they can explore that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, one of the exercises that I try to tell people to always think through is actually an exercise that we learned when we were going through our first few weeks at the farm. The farm is CIA's training camp, also known as Field Tradecraft Course, or FTC. And one of the things that the exercise that we were put through was asking ourselves, what are you uniquely good at? And this idea of being, not just good, but being uniquely good.
Right.
Uniquely good was defined as the thing that you do comes natural to you. But then on top of that, it also increases your energy. So if you start doing it at 10 a.m., and you stop doing it at 5 p.m., you have more energy at 5 p.m. than you did at 10 a.m. What is that thing? If you can find that thing, if you can do that thing, then you will never run out of energy. You can do it all day, every day, all the time. And it's a self-licking ice cream cone. You keep getting more energy out of it, which allows you to do more of it, which helps you build your 10,000 hours of experience, which helps you become a master of your craft. What is that thing that you do? And then once you kind of go through the work of figuring out what that thing is, then you have to ruthlessly shape your life around doing that thing. So at CIA, they wanted us to figure that out because there's so many different kinds of operations. There's human intelligence operations, cyber operations, sabotage operations, paramilitary operations, joint operations, liaison operations with foreign partners. Like, there's so many kinds of operations that they wanted us to really understand what is the thing that you can do all day, every day, and always have this wellspring of energy. Because if you can identify that, we can train you to do the right kind of operation so that we can send you somewhere into a dark room and you can work for 7 straight days and we don't have to worry about you.
So isn't that the thing that we should be teaching our children?
That's the argument. That's the argument that I would make now. But if you're part of the 20% and you teach this to your children, guess what you have to accept? The 80-20 rule. So if you have 3 kids, 2 of your kids are not going to be as talented, dedicated, or successful as the third kid, right? That's just empirical fact. It doesn't feel good. I'm sorry for all the people who are yelling at me and swearing at the screen, but that's just the way it is. Look, I have 2 kids. I have 2 kids. I love my 2 kids. Empirically speaking, the chances of them both being successful are almost nothing. Empirically speaking, there's only like a 20% chance that one of them is going to be successful, which is why I have to be as successful as I can be to create the legacy of wealth so that they can live off of that legacy if they need to. And hopefully they will beget children, and then those children will be 20% of those children will be successful.
Right. I just think it's so important that we teach that. And it feels like it's just strategic critical thinking. It feels like if you embed it early enough, it's not so much that it's a lesson to be taught, but just kind of part of their biological being. And I noticed that I have 1 child. See, I go 1 and go, let's just all in on 1 and just... We're going to go 1 and done. We're going to go all in, and we're going to try not to make it a weird kid, but we're going to make it a self-sufficient kid, and we're going to make it a kid that gets it. And so
we're going to make it an it.
Yes, pretty much. Exactly. But like one that knows it's a boy. How about that? So, you know, it's really important to us though, because I see this in the school system again, and the answer is just take your kid out of the school system. I'm very aware of that. I understand that. I know the school system's living garbage, but for those that can't quite do it yet, what are some other things that maybe you teach, your wife teaches, that were learned behaviors from CIA that you see being really productive? Because now your kids they're not super, super young anymore. So now that you've been out as long as you have, now that you've had them, you've had the perspective of being out also. What are the things that you've kind of instilled into them?
Yeah, you know, I love this question because it's a question that we get periodically, but it's a question I actually care about. Right? Like talking about how did you become a CIA officer? I don't really care about a lot of that. And what operations did you do? And I don't really care about that. And geopolitics, I don't really care about that either. But what I care about are my kids and the legacy that I'm building with my kids, right? Like that's what it's all about. So to answer your question, I fully understand that a number of people are tied to the hot garbage system of public education, even private education, right? Because that's just twisted. A lot of that stuff is it's all knotted up. Your kids have become livestock for some other farmer so that other farmer can qualify for certain metrics that allow them to become a larger farmer. It sucks, but that's the way it is. I get it. So here's the truth. What we've done with our family is that we have taught our kids from a developmentally appropriate point of view, because your children are not always at the same developmental stage.
Right. So
from a developmentally appropriate view, we've taught them that there's no such thing as assigned authority. Right? Authority has to be earned. So just because somebody's bigger than you doesn't mean they're smarter than you, doesn't mean they're stronger than you, doesn't mean they're faster than you, they're better than you, they're more creative than you, or any of that, right? You have to let them earn that respect from you. So my children are 7 and 11. They don't see adults as anything other than just people. They don't sir, they don't ma'am, they don't anything, right? They're just like, that's a person. Hey, person. Hey, Jim. Hey, John. Hey, Derek. Oh, you want to be called Mr. Smith? You're weird, but I'll call you Mr. Smith. That's fine. Whatever. Right? People are just people, which includes when they meet other kids, which is important because what ends up happening is when you grow up in a system of structure and hierarchy, you start to project that hierarchy on everything. So, that kid's 2 inches taller than me, so I must submit to them. And that's how you end up having 8th graders who bully 5th graders and 9th graders who bully 7th graders and 12th graders who bully 10th graders, right? So a big part of it for us has been eradicating that by always in a developmentally appropriate way, letting them know, hey, we treat people with respect. We expect people to treat us with respect. And when somebody helps you or somebody assists you or gives you some sort of meaningful assistance, like that is somebody who's trying to earn your respect and earn maybe even your willingness to put them in a position of authority, right? So that's why they listen when mom and dad tell them to do something. They listen when their educator or their private educator tells them to do something. But it took 3 months. Our private educator came into our house and she was like, I see how you've raised your kids and I appreciate it, but you're going to have to give me 3 months to earn their respect. So I can't come in here and create a platform of my authority. You're going to have to let me earn it over the course of 3 months. And no shit, Kelsey, About 11 weeks into it, our
Yeah.
daughter turned the corner. And she went from being like, I don't like Amanda. I don't want Amanda. Amanda makes terrible food. Amanda's so boring. Amanda's so bossy. She turned the corner until she was like, oh, Amanda, you're going home now? You have to leave now? When will we see you tomorrow? And now, like it is awesome because it's a proper balance. So your children are learning all day at school about hierarchy and authority that isn't real. It's assigned. Those teachers have no right to be authorities over your children. They didn't earn that in college. That's why half of them look like fucking kids anyways.
No, they don't just look like kids. They act like it.
So when your kids come home, that's your chance to kind of deprogram the false programming that has happened during the day, right? Tell me about what happened during the day. We have a lot of feeling conversations. How did it feel when your teacher did this to you? How did it feel when your teacher did this to some other student? How do you think it made that student feel when the teacher did this to them, right? How do you feel about all this homework? How would you feel about not doing your homework tonight, but doing it tomorrow? How would you feel if you showed up tomorrow and didn't have your homework done? If your teacher gives you an F, does that make you feel like a failure? Because I won't think of you as a failure if you don't do your homework. Like, show me that you know how to add. Show me that you know this algebra. Okay, Dad, here's an example. All right, well, it's up to you if you want to do your homework then. Oh, but it's 10% of my grade. Does it matter to you if you get a 70 versus a 90? Like, right. And then you as a parent have to be also asking yourself the question, like, is your plan to get your kids into another round of education on scholarship where the hierarchy will continue? Because if that's your plan, you have to act now in line with your future plan. But that's not my plan with my kids. My kids are going to learn whatever the fuck they're going to learn, when they're going to learn it, on their own time. And what's beautiful is when you start to see the world as a global conglomerate of societies, like American kids can go to European schools. They can go to Australian schools. They can go to online schools. Australians can go to European schools, online schools, Brazilian schools. Like, we don't even have to fit the standard protocol of what we were always programmed to fit.
Well, let's be frank about it. American schools aren't ranking very high anyway. So it's
exactly.
It's creating the cog. Like you said, there has to be the cogs. And that's kind of what certain parents will allow to be created. But I do know constantly and consistently, my child would come home and be like, let's talk about global warming. And I was like, oh, environment, let's please have this conversation. He goes, is that why we drive electric vehicles? I said, no, actually, it only has to do with the safety rating. Number one. Couldn't care less if it was gas. If I could get a tank in my driveway, I would have one. So it has nothing to do with that. But it's like about having these social construct conversations that fascinate me, especially with children, because that's why, and I know we have to go, and my God, I have 3 more hours of questions. But when I have you back, one of the things I want to talk about is the importance of the social hierarchy, and also the people who believe they have the control over children to the point where, is this why we're seeing so many major, feels like mental illness and ideologies attacking children?
Yeah, it's, I mean, a conversation about kids is a great conversation I would love to have. I would actually also love to set you up with my educator, because she's got some fantastic life experiences, right? She herself raised 6 children. She herself, I think 3 of those children were adoptions. 2 of those were from Africa.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Just an incredible person who really understands the concept of childhood development and how we're doing it wrong so that we can fit a social construct of cog-based repetitive economy, right? So here's the thing, if we live in a world that's built for only 20% to succeed, then we might as well prepare our children to be part of the 20%.
Right.
And in our own lives, ignore the other 80%. Like, it's just, for me, it's a very practical decision. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. It just means I'm prioritizing my time and my resources. I'm going to give my kids everything I can to make sure they're not part of the forgotten masses, but they're part of the few that get an opportunity. My parents did not do that for me. My parents set me up to be part of the forgotten masses. And against that current, I got lucky. I don't want my kids to get lucky. I want my kids to have opportunity.
Dude, I'm so glad we got to do this. I cannot wait to have that conversation. My brain is already like, and yes, I would absolutely love to have her on and have a conversation about that. That I think is, like I said, we're going into the school year again, starting. I know America has started, but we're going in again. I think there is no more important time, considering 80% of this is American listeners, to have this conversation about how you can maybe combat it, give them better tools. If they have to be in, how do we help them the best we can? And I think more importantly, just getting to sit down and have this conversation with you about your life. I know you hate talking about the same repetition, and I get it, but it is a good starting point often to just spin off into these really important subjects that I think if people knew or understood and heard more often, our world could be a lot better place. So I appreciate the time, dude.
No, thanks for having me, Kelsey.
How does everyone find you, support you, go to your programs, courses, and all of those things?
Absolutely. So you can find me at everydayspy.com. I'll have I think you're going to put my links here in the description.
We always.
And you guys, you'll find me on your favorite podcast channels and YouTube if you look for the Everyday Spy podcast. And if you're a social media person, you'll find me at Everyday Spy.
Amazing. Well, you stick with me. Everyone else, that's been a fun one. We'll see y'all next week.